Lesson 4. The views of Sahaba and Tabi'un. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma akhrijna min zulumatil wahm wa akrimna binuril fahm. Allahumma aftah alayna abwaba rahmatik wanshur alayna khazaina ulumik birahmatika ya arhamar rahimin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Welcome to Lesson 4, the views of Sahaba and Tabi'un of our course AIS 2136 or Hadith 1 under Module 1 on an overview of the sciences of Hadith. In the previous lesson on the authority of the Prophet Sunnah, we have learned that there are basically two pieces of evidence supporting the Prophet Sunnah as an Islamic proof or hujjah, namely rational or akli and textual or naqli. That textual evidence consists of the Quran, consensus or ijma, and the Muslim's mental attitude. The textual evidence from the Quran are passage about the Prophet's judicial authority, obedience to the Prophet as tantamount to obedience to God, the Prophet as exemplary model or uswatun hasana, and the need for referring to all teachings of the Prophet. In lessons 1 and 3 about the Prophet's Sunnah as Islamic proof, and in lesson 1 and 2 we have learned that the Prophet's Sunnah is an Islamic proof and primary source of the religion, second only to the Quran, that is according to rational and textual evidence. The question is, how about the views of the companions or Sahaba and the followers or Tabi'un? So before dealing with that, let us first clarify ourselves of who the companions and followers are. When we say companions or Sahaba, we are referring to the companions of the Prophet. In earlier times, the term was given only to his close friends who had close contact with him. But later, the term was extended to include the believers who had seen him, even though it was for a brief moment or at an early age. While Tabi'un or followers or successors refers to the second generation of Muslims who came after the companions, who did not know the Prophet but who knew his companions. So there are different views regarding the degree of authoritativeness of the companions or Sahaba and followers Tabi or Tabi'un sayings. For example, 1. The companion saying as having intrinsic or dhati and distinct istiqlali or distinct authority. The companion saying as having no intrinsic authority and infallibility or isma as exclusive to the Prophet, and the companions and followers sayings as having no intrinsic authority. A number of Sunni scholars regard the companion sayings as intrinsically authoritative. They treat them as an integral part of the prophetic Sunnah. Of course, there are certain differences among them regarding the extent or realm of the companion sayings. Some of them have only limited this authority to the sayings of the first two caliphs, Abu Bakr and Umar, on the basis of this narration. Imitate those who are after me, Abu Bakr and Umar. You can see it in Musnad Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Sunan at-Tirmidhi, among others. Others have extended his authority to include the rightly guided caliphs or Khulafa ur-Rashidin, namely Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and Hassan ibn Ali, on the basis of another alleged narration of the Prophet. Thus, alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati khulafa'i rashidin. Incumbent upon you is my sunnah, or way, and the way of the rightly guided caliphs. We can see it in Sunan Ibn Majah, Fathul Bari, Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari, among others. Some other scholars regard the sayings of all companions as intrinsically authoritative, and based on the research of the present author, Shatibi and Sarkhasi among the early scholars, and all the recent Sunni authorities subscribe to this opinion. After applying the word Sunnah to the Prophet's connections, Shatibi has added thus. And the word Sunnah can also be applied to what the companions have done, whether this can be found in the book or the Sunnah or not, because the companion's action is in accordance with the Sunnah, which is established for them, whether this has reached us or not, or based upon an ijtihad which has been agreed upon by them or their successors, the followers or Tabi'un. Al-Muwafiqat, page 672. Obviously, Shatibi's generalization in relation to the companion's action applies to cases when it cannot be found in the book and the Sunnah. And Shatibi believes that if the companion's ijtihad has ijma or consensus, it is intrinsically authoritative. Another scholar, Sarkhasi, also stipulates that the word Sunnah is applied to the conduct of the Prophet and the companions. In contrast to Shafi'i, who believes that Sunnah is only applied to the Prophet's Sunnah, he emphasizes that Sunnah can also be applied to the companions, saying, and their Sunnah is also obligatory to follow. We can find it in the book of Sarkhasi himself, Usulul Sarkhasi, volume 1. Therefore, Sarkhasi is one of the Sunni scholars who, apart from defending the correctness of applying the word Sunnah to the companion sayings, also consider their Sunnah intrinsically and independently authoritative. Furthermore, in Sharh Musnad Abu Hanifa, by relying on the narration, my companions are like stars, whoever among them you follow, you will be guided. Abu Ali al-Qari has regarded the companion Sunnah as absolutely authoritative. Jassas, another scholar, is also of the belief that if the companions have a consensus of opinion or ijma on a ruling or hukm, their statement is authoritative. We can find it in Al-Fusul fil Usul by Ahmad ibn Ali al-Razi al-Khassas. After citing a mawquf tradition of Ibn Abbas who says circumambulation or tawaf around the Kaaba is like the performance of ritual prayer, except that God has permitted one to talk while doing it, Imam An-Nawawi has added, this hadith is mawquf because it is a statement and an ijtihad by a companion, but since this view is spread out and there has been no opposition to it, it is authoritative on the basis of correct opinion. We can find it in An-Nawawi's book Al-Minhaj fi Sharh Sahih Muslim Ibn al-Hajjaj, volume 8. By the way, mawquf as a classification of hadith refers to a narration or hadith attributed to a companion or sahaba, whether it is his statement, action, or something else. Another view is that the companion sayings as having no intrinsic authority. Most of the Sunni scholars regard the companion sayings as being authoritative so long as they exemplify and represent the Prophet's Sunnah. For this reason, these scholars believe that the companions' ahadith are marfu' or traceable. In reality, they believe that the authority of the companion Sunnah is derivative and it emanates from the authority of the Prophet's Sunnah, and therefore it is not intrinsic. In this connection, Imam An-Nawawi thus says, the saying of a companion or sahabi is authoritative on account of disclosing the Prophet's Sunnah only if it can be connected to the time of the Prophet. For if a companion had ever done something during the time of the Prophet, apparently the Prophet was informed of it and had his approval. We can find it again in his book Al-Minhaj fi Sharh Sahih Muslim Ibn al-Hajjaj, Volume 1. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, another author and scholar, has said, a companion saying, even if it is not connected to the time of the Prophet, is marfu in terms of ruling, although it is literally mawquf. Khatib Baghdadi has examined the various forms of the companion sayings, generally regarding them as authoritative in view of their veracity and their outward standing as contemporaneous with the Prophet, who was aware of their sayings and actions and had not prohibited them. We can find it in his own book, Al-Kifaya fi Ma'rifatul Riwaya, page 499. This opinion, like that of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, shows that a companion saying, according to Khatib Baghdadi, is authoritative if it discloses the Prophet's Sunnah. Fakhruddin al-Razi and al-Ghazali, meanwhile, have specified that infallibility or isma was exclusive to the Prophet, and the companions and followers saying cannot be intrinsically authoritative. For example, in his book Al-Mahsul, Fakhruddin has said, the truth is that a companion saying is not an authority, and a group says that it is an absolute authority, and another group has elaborated and presented the viewpoints as follows. 1. If it is against analogy or qiyas, then it is an authority. 2. Only the sayings of Abu Bakr and Umar are authoritative. Number 3. Whenever they have consensus or ijma, the sayings of the first 4 caliphs are authoritative. Our proof consists of the text or nas of the Quran, consensus and analogy. The nas refers to the statement of God, thus, so take lesson, O you who have insight, Suratul Hashr 59:2, which enjoins taking lesson and reflection or tafakkur, and is inconsistent with the permissibility of blind imitation. Consensus is such in the sense that the companions have a consensus on the permissibility of disagreeing with another's opinion, and Abu Bakr and Umar have not also hindered those who disagreed with their views or had disagreement among themselves. Meanwhile, it is unlawful or haram to follow the rulings of anyone who adopts analogy as his basis, as indicated in the science of principles or ilmul usul. We can find it in Fakhruddin al-Razi's book Al-Mahsul, Volume 6. In this regard, Imam al-Ghazali has also said, one of the fictitious and absurd principles pertains to a companion saying. A group believes that a companion's belief is an absolute authority. Another group agrees with it provided that it is against analogy. Yet another group holds that only the sayings of Abu Bakr and Umar are authoritative on the basis of the prophetic tradition. Imitate those who are after me, Abu Bakr and Umar, while a fourth group maintains that the sayings of the rightly guided caliphs in case of having consensus are authoritative. In our opinion, all these views are rejected because every statement of anyone who commits error or mistake and whose infallibility or isma cannot be authoritative. Thus, considering the existence of the probability of committing error, how can his saying be authoritative? Without the existence of any mutawatir proof or tradition, how can the companion's infallibility be claimed? How can the infallibility of a group whose members have disagreement among themselves be conceivable? How can two infallibles disagree with each other? How can Abu Bakr and Umar not afford to confront those who oppose their ijtihad? In fact, on the contrary, in matters of ijtihad, every mujtahid considers it incumbent upon himself to act upon his ijtihad. So, the lack of proof to substantiate the companion's infallibility, the occurrence of differences among themselves, and their stipulation on the permissibility of opposing their views are the three categorical proofs that support this claim. This lengthy statement from Imam al-Ghazali can be found in Al-Mustasfa fi Ilm al-Usul, page 168. By the way, by mujtahid, we are referring to an authority on the divine law of Islam who practices ijtihad, that is the search for a correct opinion in the deduction of the specific provisions of the law from its principles and ordinances. Keeping the quoted views and statements of many Sunni scholars and authorities in view, we can conclude that most of the sayings of the companions, according to most of the Sunni scholars, intrinsically lack authority, and they are only such if they represent or reflect the Sunnah of the Prophet. Of course, there are differences among them concerning the connection between the companion saying and the Prophet's Sunnah and how they represent it. So, in summary, these are the following points. There are different views regarding the degree of authoritativeness of the companions and followers' sayings. The companion sayings as having intrinsic authority, intrinsic and distinct authority. Shatibi and Sarkhasi from among the Salafi Sunni scholars as well as a number of contemporary scholars are of this view. The companion sayings as having no intrinsic authority. Most of the Sunni scholars regard the companion saying as being authoritative as they exemplify and represent the Prophet's Sunnah. For this reason, these scholars believe that the companions' ahadith are marfu' or traceable. Furthermore, Fakhruddin al-Razi and al-Ghazali have specified that infallibility or isma was exclusive to the Prophet, and the companions and followers' sayings cannot be intrinsically authoritative. Next lesson, we will deal with hadith during the Prophet's time. For more similar lessons, just subscribe to Wayfaring with Mansoor channel. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.